I think this is an existential moment for democracy, and I hear a lot of people trying to get cute about the filibuster and, we're going to be in the minority again, and Mitch McConnell's up there saying we're going to pass every single policy item that we've ever wanted to pass if you get rid of the filibuster, and by the way, you had control of all of the houses of government.
It's exactly what they did. It's exactly what they did when Trump got elected and they swept in. And guess what? All they did was just pass tax cuts. That's all they did.
Right, basically. And do judges. And so that's kind of the point. Yeah. Is like, bro, if you were going to do it, call his bluff. If he was going to do it, he would have done it already.
What up, world? And welcome back to another episode of the Ameri Podcast.
Heyo.
Flawless. That's the title of this episode.
Much better that time.
Flawless.
It gets sillier every time I'm here.
What up, everybody? We got another excellent, flawless episode for you this evening with a special guest, Jordan Scruggs, in the house. What's up, Jordan?
Hello, hello, hello.
The Rev.
Happy to be here. No, not anymore.
No, not anymore. She's retired.
Can we just use it as your Can we just use it as your podcast nickname, though? Because it's pretty cool.
You could, but I'm not nearly as cool as it makes me sound.
I mean,
I withdrew from my process.
Strong disagree.
Well, if you would like to call me that, I will allow it.
Excellent.
Today is Friday, 8:31 p.m.
Thank God.
Thank God we made it to Friday. Yeah, it was a long week. I mean, I don't have kids, so I can only imagine, Jordan, what your week was like. But
it's fine. We had daylight savings time recently, so up everything.
Oh no! Was Sage getting up at the crack of dawn, or what?
She was staying up an hour later than she was supposed to, and sleeping into the time that she was supposed to be her babysitters, and screaming whenever I woke her up too early. So it was good. Great. Really good.
That's okay. I scream when I have to wake up too early too, so I feel her pain.
I do too. I try to empathize because I'm doing it internally. I just learned how to self-regulate in a way that she has not as a toddler. So.
That's what I was going to say. Most of the screaming happens inside of my head.
Right.
This is adulthood.
It's like, I know, I understand how you feel, but there's nothing I can do about it.
That's Jordan Scruggs, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who don't know her. Formerly the Reverend. Happy to have you on the show. Welcome back.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Also with us this evening in the Denver metro area, Mr. John Kelly. Hello, sir. How are you?
Doing well. Glad to be back. I guess sorry for the little break we took, but I think there's a good amount of stuff we can get through this evening. Hopefully everyone out there, all the listeners, have been good last couple of weeks.
We have so much to talk about.
Yes, there's a lot to talk about. Also out in the Denver metro area, Mr. John Anderson. Hello, sir. How you doing?
Hello, sir. Hanging out on a Friday. There's so many things we need to talk about. There's like 4 things. We have a long list already tonight, and there's like 4 things I want to talk about that we're just not going to be able to get to.
I've got a 5th thing to add to it, by the way, just when we get there.
There's just so much shit. It's so bad.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm your host, Blake Mangan. I remembered this time.
Nailed it.
I get to drink one because I remembered.
This is true.
Very nice. Very nice.
Right. So we are here to talk about a plethora of events and items, but not all of them are as happy and pleasant as we would like them to be. Unfortunately, to start off, I think we were going to do a little update on the Governor Cuomo situation out in New York, and then we were going to talk a little bit gun violence and mosey on through some other current events. So thanks for joining us, everybody. And who would like to kick it off?
Yeah, I would. Cuomo should resign, and he should no longer be in the Democratic Party. Next.
Yeah, it does seem like a pretty easy answer at this point.
All right,
I agree with you.
Topic done. Covered. You're welcome.
It's really frustrating because I feel like, I mean, on a national level now, he's sort of known as being this bully, but like I live in New York and I'm relatively politically engaged locally, and it's like I have not heard of any like sexual assault allegations or harassment allegations before now, but it's like common knowledge that he's just like a huge bully. Like that's just a thing. Like he's just known for being. And so, in times like the pandemic, when, he becomes, America's governor because he's taking a hard line against a lot of things. And I honestly, like, he really screwed up the nursing home crap.
It's
but
horrible.
I will say that, like, when the actual pandemic was happening and when it's still happening, but when in the early stages of the pandemic last year, I felt really grateful that he was our governor because he was taking a really like tough stance on things that other people were pretending like wasn't a big deal. And so probably more people would have died. But the fact of the matter is, like, it doesn't just because he did some good things or managed something well doesn't mean that he's suddenly exempt from scrutiny or from ethical responsibility when he's done something like this. And I'm so sick of like seeing people on Twitter and on other social media platforms defending him and being like, oh, well, this is because Trump is worried about being prosecuted in New York, and so he's like paying off all these people to like get involved and accuse Cuomo of doing different things. And it's like, no, he's not.
Gotta love the conspiracy theory thought process there, right? That
right.
It's not believing victims, right? Which is a problem in some, especially sometimes in the Democratic Party, right?
Because it's too easy.
The Democratic Party does not believe victims if it's not politically expedient. And we as a party, at least me personally, hopes that the Democratic Party is someone who believes victims, right? And allows that to be part of the conversation without having that seep in of, oh, this is a conspiracy theory that Trump's trying to force this to happen to get Cuomo out of office. And I agree with you, Jordan. I think you were spot on. He was almost like the poster child, right, of the way that the response should have happened in some ways, right? It looked like he was doing a great job, and it looked like he was running his administration properly. And now that there's time where people have really looked into it, all these sexual allegations have come out. Obviously, all of the serious allegations of them fudging numbers in nursing homes, and him using his personal connections to allow certain people to get tested and certain people to get vaccine access early. It reeks of the type of insider power corruption that, as citizens, you should be pissed about. Right. And that we try to rail against on this podcast because, we don't like to see it.
Yeah. Like it shouldn't be a partisan issue. If you are a Democrat and you're defending him because he's a Democrat, shame on you. We have somehow
shame.
We have somehow become the party of values, which is kind of wild to me. Growing up, as a kid in the 90s and then the Bush administration, but somehow we have. And I think we should continue to enforce our values on our own and our political opponents just the same. And so even if like Trump is doing an epic, oppo dump on Cuomo, fucking fine. Like if it's true, it doesn't matter what the source is. We have to police our own.
Right.
And, by our own, I mean Democrats, and also I mean Americans. And so fuck this guy. He should resign. I probably said something on this podcast along the lines of like, why is he not in the presidential, conversation during when he was doing well? And I now am like, thank fucking God that he was not.
I don't think he did. But you might have.
I hope not at this point. But I definitely said it to people. I remember thinking it watching some of the news conferences. And so like, mea culpa on that one. Thank fucking God he wasn't a part of our presidential process, and he shouldn't be, and he should not be a member in good standing in the Democratic Party for all the things.
Yeah.
But still this is a good example of how there are imperfections within both political parties, right? Both Democrats and Republicans. I got into a little bit of a debate with a family member on Facebook this past week over some social media.
Yeah, the worst start to any sentence.
Yeah, it was about they posted like a list of specifically Democratic legislators and people who have served in some form of office who had been charged with some form of like pedophilia or like child pornography.
Save the
And
children.
so, yeah, and
Hashtag.
so I was like, hey, the Republicans have like a pretty good list too, and I posted it.
Unfortunately, true.
And he was like, all you damn Democrats want to do is debate, blah blah blah. And I was like, no, man, like, I'm just letting you know that it's on both sides. That's all. Like, there's nothing to debate about.
Nobody's debating anything. People.
Yeah.
She just can't be in. We got to get it out of the
offering
partisan
facts.
lens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but like,
Yeah, it's like these are bad Americans doing stuff. It's not Republicans or Democrats doing.
Right.
Exactly.
100%.
I also think though it's bad Americans, but it's also like I think that there's a specific brand of politically bad or bad Americans who are political, maybe, in the sense that like once you've attained a certain amount of power, politically and also financially, I mean those two things often go together, it's like suddenly the rules do not apply to you. And so you're able to justify or offer rationale for doing things that we would not allow average everyday citizens to do.
And there's also a racial component to this, right? Where we saw in the Atlanta shootings where the cop came out and was like, "Oh, he had a bad day," and it's like, bro, that is not a bad. George Floyd had a bad day too.
Yeah,
I think
like
though,
that.
I think if anything, it's like white. I don't even think it has to do with money, Jordan. I think that it can influence people in that direction. But I know people who aren't really wealthy, who are white, who have that same kind of like ego of they can go around and do whatever they want. And so maybe it comes down to like privilege and stuff too,
I definitely think there's it's the idea of intersectionality, which has been around for 30 years in sociological studies, where people have multiple identities that sometimes compete with each other but sometimes reinforce each other. And so if you're thinking about whiteness is its own issue, and I think we were going to talk about that a little bit in terms of the podcast this evening related to the shootings, but there's privilege that comes with wealth. There's privilege that comes with inherited versus earned wealth, and then also just a racial component, a gender component, all of that.
Yeah, where you can be like, "Oh, I didn't shoot up Asian women because I'm a racist. I shot them up because I'm a sex addict and a misogynist." And people are like, "Okay," and you're like, "But can't he be both?"
Right?
Wait,
can't
what?
you?
Yeah. I mean, it's the type of thing, and it's the exact reason that the Black Lives Matter movement happened over the summer. It's the exact reason that there was the response in Atlanta from the Asian American community. And also, let's just be clear that there's been a rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans in this country since the start of the pandemic. A dramatic rise. Yeah. So that also influenced Atlanta. But the fact that there were people in the police force in Georgia that were saying those types of things, that, oh, he had a bad day, it's not a bad thing, right? And then the suspect coming out and saying, it's because I was a sex addict that I ended up doing these things to try to stop my own addiction to something, right? It is the pinnacle of an idealized privilege that you can take another person's life and that you could stop another person's life just because they have a supposed negative impact on how you are living because you feel guilty about how people judge you. Right. Yeah. And there's really a lot of stuff that I do wish that Tyler was kind of on, because I know that it's his ballpark, right, to really talk about male fragility, and the idea of white privilege is something that he's really into. But
and power and sex and
it's a lot of things, and exactly, and it's so disappointing that someone can come out and say something like that, and there's community members around him that go, yeah, that's fine.
And it's because those guys are like, oh yeah, that makes sense, because it probably does make sense for them,
right? And I don't want to throw them all under the bus, because like his church kicked him out. Like the next day, they voted to disband him from the church, right? The Atlanta
Good.
shooter. And like, it's not like it's a widespread thing, but there was this initial acceptance for it before a lot of the facts came out about
Right.
the person himself and what the extent of the crimes were. And so I think it's a better conversation moving forward. But the bottom line is that there's serious mental health issues in this country, and we need to do a better job, I think, at controlling access to guns. Right. I think that's what we're really getting at.
I was talking, so a couple of my friends, actually, I've mentioned, I think, to John before having my friend Haruk on. She's about to finish up her dissertation, but she would be just like such an interesting person to talk to about this stuff. So she's,
let's get her on.
She's she's amazing. She's Sage's godmom, actually. And, and she's getting her dissertation in religious studies and feminist studies from Harvard right now. And her whole, like, she's Japanese. She's married to a Korean man. So there's like the history of Japan and Korea, like in their relationship, and Japan's, colonizing of Korea, but also the patriarchy that is inherent in both of those cultures. And listening to her, I'd like sent them a text this past week, after the shooting happened, just like checking in and being like, hey, like, how are you guys doing? They live in Boston. They're not in that area, but I know that, the two of them were like, for them, this very much is an Asian hate crime. And especially when you think about like the sexualization of Asian women, and when you
100%.
like map on top of that, the fetishization of Asian women as like these docile, subservient creatures that I don't know if you guys,
they're objects.
Have you guys heard of like yellow fever?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of that term, where it's like, white men like liking Asian women because of their servility, basically. And also there's like this weird sort of like colonial eroticism and exoticization that happens with Asian women. And she's writing her dissertation on basically like the relationship between Christianity and Asian religions. And I'm reading her dissertation right now and like editing it for her.
Nice.
And so I've like, all of this stuff was like fresh in my mind as I was like watching this stuff unfold. And it was so interesting to like listen to them talk about it. And then also for Kyung-won, her husband, to sort of point out, he's like, it is insane to me to live in a country, and they're going to become, they'll be lawful permanent residents next year. But to like have moved to a country where the rate of gun ownership is so incredibly high. It's like, more people have died from gun violence since the time that I have lived here in the United States than have died from gun violence since I was born in Korea. And just like what's like
staggering,
the
isn't it?
proliferation.
It's staggering.
It's incredible. Yeah. It's incredible.
Yeah, and I mean, another thing, we wanted to touch on too was the Boulder shooting this week as well.
Right.
And for both of them, when the news broke, and I felt really guilty about it this week and last week as well. But it's just like I've gotten to the point where I am really pretty numb about shootings, and it says something about our society that it is such a numbing process now.
Yes.
You basically, you paste over it, you get numb about it. People are tired of the outrage around it. They're tired about feeling sad about it. But we have had mass shootings every day for a month. Basically, when you look at the stats, if you look at what is considered a mass shooting in the United States, there's basically one every day. And, not all of them make news the way that the ones this last couple of weeks do. And then when they do, it becomes such a quick cycle of, we need to have gun legislation. We can't have any gun legislation, 24-hour cycle. That's it.
Yep.
And it's shameful that it's that every single time. Look at what Ted Cruz said in the Senate, right? Look at what Ted Cruz said in the Senate. He sat there while there was a bill in front of them to talk about having universal background checks, which the majority of American citizens want.
The majority of Republican gun owners want that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
Right.
he sat there and he said, why are we wasting our time even having this conversation? Everybody knows nothing's going to happen. And he said it to his base, right? To be like, yeah, he protects the Second Amendment, but he also dug at something deeper, which is that nothing's really going to happen on the federal
Right.
level. Unfortunately, the way that it's set up and the way that the two sides have to battle it out, that it has to be a black and white issue. All guns, no guns. Background checks,
Right.
no background checks. There's no
this
movement
part-
on it at all, and it's exhausting.
Is this
after a
part
while.
of the reason why there's been so much news lately on removing the filibuster, or at least changing it?
No, guns had gone away because we were in the middle of a global pandemic where we all stayed home. My first thought when I saw the shooting in Atlanta was, this is the clearest sign that I've seen so far that America is getting back to normal, which is
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
fucking dystopian. But no, the filibuster right now is mostly in conversation because of things like the $15 minimum wage, because of voting rights. The gun issue might fall into that basket, but it was not something that was front of mind in the political zeitgeist up until this last week, 10 days, however long it's been.
I imagine it'll probably fall into that basket. Didn't the Trump administration make it easier for people with mental health issues to get a gun just like real recently, last year, like within the last 6 months or something?
I don't know specifically for that. I am almost positive that we have expanded gun rights since Newtown, which
Right.
for me,
Yeah.
that was the moment where like I fell into pretty significant despair about our gun issue. Because
Yeah.
if you have 20 children, first graders, kindergartners murdered, and we do nothing about it, we are a broken society.
Right. Clearly by a person who, if there was any type of legitimate background check, would have been denied
Would
the
have
opportunity.
never had a weapon, right?
Right.
I something that I remember, something that you said, John, when the shooting in Newtown happened, because so I was in seminary at the time, like 30 minutes away from Newtown, and so I have colleagues, former colleagues in the United Methodist Church who were like pastoring the Newtown United Methodist Church when all this happened, and were like had children in their congregation who died during that shooting, and had to like provide emotional support to the parents who lost children. And I remember something that you said, John, was like, your Second Amendment right to own a gun cannot trump the right of a child to grow up. And I felt like that just like really stuck with me. And thinking about, how we are addressing these issues or not addressing these issues. And I think it says a lot about like our values as a culture. Like what do we value?
Yeah.
And clearly, and I think this goes back to like our obsession, honestly, at the root with like money and wealth, like who produces wealth, who makes money, what makes money. Guns make money, ammunition makes money, weaponizing things make money. Children don't. Old people don't, right? Like they're not worthy of protection or care in the same way that able-bodied people are. And guess what? If you're able-bodied, then you have your own weapons so you can protect yourself.
And I
Very,
think the
very
money,
strong criticism in truth.
the money component of this is an extremely important part to recognize, because when you look at the polling data, common sense gun legislation is extremely popular. We do not, as a country, get above 60% on any kind of controversial issue, and we get above 60% in the top 4 or 5 gun policies. And so the reason that they do not happen is because the NRA, who does not represent gun owners, they represent gun manufacturers, ruins the legislation every single time. And in fact, usually is able to drop in expansion of gun rights, which is probably what Blake was talking about earlier, into bills. And so we need to change the discourse. And I like Biden has been doing this too, where he's like, don't tell me that the COVID bill was not bipartisan just because Republicans in the Senate didn't vote for it. It's got 70% approval rating among the American people. Right. Not all of that 70% are Democrats. So this is a bipartisan issue. And we need to, I think, adopt that same framing with this, especially when we're talking about the NRA. It is a consensus issue in the United States that there should be background checks. And so this is something it's really like, Kelly, I hear you so much on the numbness to it. And like we have a friend who him and I were texting back and forth, and he's like, I have known you to be numb to this, but the Boulder one hit me particularly hard because of my roots there. And we have to keep fighting this fight because we can't have a society where 20 children can get murdered and nothing is done about it. That is not a sustainable society.
I agree, John. I agree 100%. And, I think it does bring us, really into the larger issue, one that we talk about most nights. And again, we're going to get back into it, which is that there is one party that represents a very small amount of people that controls basically half of the voting power in this country.
Yeah.
And that's what we're looking at. Democrats are a tent party, and the Republicans are a small and dwindling grabbing power party.
And typically when a political party starts to lose elections on a consistent basis, they will change their policies to accommodate the people. However, the Republican Party's response over the last several election cycles has been, well, let's just make sure that those people can't vote so that we can continue to have our own positions.
It kicked into high gear in Georgia. Kicked into high gear in Georgia. There's been 43 state legislatures that have had voter suppression bills introduced. There's been over 250 bills introduced since the 2016 election, according to the Brennan Center today. And it is astonishing to me that the Republican Party's response to their loss in 2020 was, we're just going to ruin democracy. It's not, quote, surprising, but it is still shocking and astonishing to me. This is something shocking's right. Shocking's right.
And so we have to kill the filibuster because we have to pass a bill protecting voting rights, because in Georgia, they just signed a bill, which, by the way, if you guys have seen a picture of the signing ceremony, the painting behind them is a painting of a plantation. Surprise! Right. And so they signed a bill in Georgia that in part of it makes it illegal to hand out water and food to people waiting in voting lines. You tell me what the governmental purpose is of that. It's fucking bananas. And so, that to me sounds like a very good way to get into some good trouble in 2022 if you are in the Georgia area.
Did you say that did pass?
It passed. They signed it. It's law.
Yeah, it passed.
How does that pass?
Because we live in the second era of Jim Crow, and we're going to have to decide how deep that goes in the next several election cycles.
That just doesn't make any sense. Like,
so
here's the thing. If you're going to say that I can't go hand out a peanut butter and jelly sandwich to the person standing in line to vote, what's next? Are you going to take away my gun rights? Like,
right? Yeah. Well, I was reading on Twitter. One lady who's a lawyer was like, okay, so like, if I pass out because of heat exhaustion in line, does that mean that the paramedics can't give me water? Like,
sure.
How are you going to implement this law? And so that to me, I feel like they're going to get sued by every, pro-democracy group in America, and this probably gets struck down. But it is still a flashing red warning light in the health of democracy, and we've got to.
Who knows? They'll get sued. The state of Georgia will get sued by multiple people. Will it change within the state of Georgia? Who knows? This could very well be in front of the Supreme Court in a year's time.
Isn't Georgia Stacey Abrams' state?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, Stacey Abrams is the queen of everything.
I agree.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, let's
Stacey
elect her
Abrams,
queen of the universe, and just she can be like. So there's heads of state and there's heads of what is it? Heads
And
of
then there's
state and
queens
heads
of
of
universe.
government.
There's queens of the universe.
So, like the British, their head of state is the queen, and their head of government is the prime minister. In the United States, the president is both. But I think we should just make our head of state Stacey Abrams. Like maybe we get back into the monarchy business just for Stacey.
You know, I honestly though, like, so when we were talking about like who should Biden select as VP. I know a lot of people were like talking about like Stacey Abrams, but like I am like, leave her right the fuck where she is. Like,
I think that was
do
her
not
calculation
move her.
too.
Like Georgia needs her, and you know, I have a good friend from undergrad who's still in North Carolina, and he's like constantly posting, you know, on Facebook and like ranting and raving about like everybody thinks that like we should just like there was some kind of like meme or something where it was like during the election where somebody had like made this meme that was a map of the United States and like basically taken a pair of scissors and like cut off the southern United States and said like just let them join their own, you know, let them join their own union.
Secede.
Like we don't need them. Let them secede. And he's like, no, the majority of the people who live here don't actually want this stuff either. It's voter suppression that is keeping people from
100%.
voting. Like the majority of the people who live here want the same things. And by this is like a northeastern liberal elitist way of dealing with the problem of racism that they are unwilling or unable to see that they are implicated in. And I just thought that was like that was like really, really, really telling. And
we saw that with the Texas freeze recently, where you had like who the fuck is that? Moore, the documentarian, was like
Michael Moore.
Michael Moore. He was like, we should withhold vaccines from. Oh no, it was about the mask mandate, and he was like, we should withhold vaccines from them. And I'm like, bro. Number one, no, because the way viruses work. Number two, the partisan statement you're making is abhorrent, and also 48% of people in Texas are Democrats. So like, fuck you all the way to hell. Like all the way for that take.
Yeah, it's true.
Boo. And so
there's a lack of humanitarianism. In a way, in that way, where you look at it and you go, and for the people who are really involved on the Democratic side, they get that, and they get that there's a lot of the red states are changing, and that's why you see such an extreme response, especially after this last election cycle, right, John? When you read off all those stats earlier about how many bills have been passed state by state, you saw that right during election time in November. How many states, when Trump didn't win, it was like, wait, but can't we as a legislator just overturn our own state's electors because we have a Republican-controlled, House and Senate within our own state? We have a Republican governor. I mean, that's what it looks like currently in terms of the political landscape in this country. It is dominated by the Republican Party when it comes to state legislators, state governorships. It's dominated on that side. For better or worse, it is what it is. And they see that there's a sea change within a lot of these states. And there are a lot of viewpoints that are on the Democratic side that their base is unwilling to even approach the table on. And so that's what we're looking at in terms of how we are going to move our country forward, but also how we're going to have a actual functioning democracy where there's actually two parties that have legitimate conversations about policy development, about how we're supposed to move forward. Because there are really legitimate things that we need to discuss in terms of our fiscal policy, in terms of, our gun rights policy, all that stuff. But when you have one obstructionist party that controls the majority of state houses and half of the Senate and a good chunk of the House, and potentially will win seats back in 2022 next year.
History suggests they will.
That's what 538 is saying, actually. I literally just pulled an article up by 538 saying Republicans are on track
it's why
to take
it's so important, and we haven't mentioned it specifically yet, but why the voting rights bill needs to pass right now in the House and in the Senate. It needs to pass. It needs to become federal law. We cannot stand here and allow ourselves to fall back into 1930s voting systems throughout the nation, because it disenfranchises people across the board, white, black, Latino. It disenfranchises everyone, but it benefits a small group of people. And they're willing to sacrifice our democracy and our political health of our body politic just to make sure to grip to power in certain areas. So
when we
pass it tomorrow.
Yeah. When we call the United States a democracy, what we're really talking about is we've been a democracy for about the last 70 years, probably starting with the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. So we need to be aware of our history, that it is tenuous, and we have not been a democracy that long. And I think this is an existential moment for democracy. And I hear a lot of people trying to get cute about the filibuster and, oh, well, we're going to be in the minority again. And should we be worried about, and Mitch McConnell's up there saying, we're going to pass every single policy item that we've ever wanted to pass if you get rid of the filibuster. And, oh, by the way, you had control of all of the houses of government.
It's exactly what they did. It's exactly what they did when Trump got elected and they swept in. And guess what? All they did was pass tax cuts. That's all they did.
Right.
Basically.
And do judges. And so that's kind of the point. Is like, bro, if you were going to do it, call his bluff. If he was going to do it, he would have done it already. So no, I think we cannot get too cute with this. This is an existential moment. Get rid of the filibuster and pass the voting rights, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Let's get it done. And we just can't. This is like everybody
it's an historic
to the
moment.
breaches.
This is 1964 again. It's an historic moment again. It is.
We do not have a next election cycle. This is it.
Well, so
we have to win this.
I think that the most. I was just like looking over some of the provisions in the voting rights legislation that's up right now, and it seems to me that some of the changes that would be made are, I mean, they're long lasting, and it's designed in a way that, in theory, if there were as many Republicans voting as Democrats, or many people who leaned Republican as Democrat, it would benefit everyone across the board.
Turns out
it's not about privileging Democratic voters; it's about privileging voters. Period. And the one place where I think Republicans stand to lose something is where it's been historically unfair, and that's in the way that districts are gerrymandered. I mean, North Carolina. I don't know if you guys ever looked at. If you remember, a couple of years ago. I think it's probably in the 2016 election, where basically North Carolina was sued because their gerrymandering looks like a toddler with spaghetti. I mean, it's just like it's like all over
I think
the
it went to
place.
the Supreme Court,
literally street by street.
Yeah,
in some cities,
and it was like they like carved places up specifically. I mean, it's like the voter legislation that was introduced. I think it was in Georgia recently, that was designed to prevent people from doing get out the vote Sundays, where you go to like pray your way to the polls, which is designed specifically to disenfranchise Black people.
Wow.
So it's just like the fact that people don't want to support this legislation, I think, just underlines how low the Republican Party is willing to stoop to prevent people from exercising a democratic right. And to go back to what John was saying about, we've really only been a democracy or aspired to be a full democracy for the last 60 years, basically, right? Not any more than that. And we've never actually attained it. We've never actually attained it. And we see why Republicans are scared, because when you have a powerful person like Stacey Abrams, who is able to mobilize and organize and turn out voters, she wasn't even pushing necessarily a super progressive platform, right? I mean, she herself is a progressive individual, but she was pushing to vote. That's it. Just exercise your vote. And when that happens and people feel enfranchised and like they can participate, it's transformative for our democracy, and it's better for everyone. But that's exactly why Republicans are so dedicated to not allowing this to happen, because they know that their grip on power is so tenuous.
I think
the thing is, sorry, go ahead, John.
I think it's extremely important that we. Oh no! Now I just lost the point. Sorry, Kelly. Go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is that. What I thought about your statement on the gerrymandering was really important to highlight, just again, because I know that we've talked about it in the past, and we just got through another census, so there's going to be another redrawing of districts, which is very important, state by state. And I will just give a shout out to Colorado having a bipartisan, non-political group to redraw districts. I've seen some very interesting maps about how they're going to potentially redraw congressional districts in Colorado, which is very interesting. Which I love.
We should have Marco back on to talk about that.
Yeah, good idea. But when you look at the gerrymandering topic, I understand why the idea was, built in theoretically as a way that political parties can deal with each other in a way to protect minority groups. That was kind of the idea behind it. Unfortunately, because it's such a zero-sum game in American politics, what you have is very specifically drawn districts. And what it does is it fuels, I think, really, I would say just alongside our addiction to media outlets, our addiction to having certain belief structures in terms of if you lean left or right, it reinforces those ideas within communities, right? There are very serious lines between communities that are drawn because of redistricting every 10 years that divide our communities even further, where you would actually have people that are democratically leaning would lean right and do lean right on certain issues, right? If the Republican Party could have a more of a coherent, a legitimately bringing in type of platform that actually has some.
So true.
Well, they don't. Their platforms like Save Dr. Seuss, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, they don't understand that you can be a liberal Republican and a conservative Republican.
Yeah,
but you used to be able to, please. At least.
That's not a thing anymore. That's not a thing anymore.
Right.
They used to have that in politics, where you had people that were somewhat in the middle that would go back and forth.
And
there's still those people.
Center Republicans,
right?
Yeah.
There's still those people. It's just that the parties, the way that, and especially because of gerrymandering, do not represent people that way.
I would say tier number one in terms of fixing our democracy would be getting money out of politics and by a constitutional amendment. Tier number two, as far as threats to our democracy, if tier number one is money, then I would put gerrymandering in tier two. I think it takes a little bit. You have to kind of game it out a little bit to understand exactly how destructive it is. But the way politics are supposed to work is you're supposed to have somebody on the left and somebody on the right argue, and then the quote best solution is in the middle. But the way that districts are drawn, you're not worried about somebody coming in and taking your job from the middle. You're worried about somebody taking your job from the edges. So if you roll that through for a couple of election cycles, it means that the parties move further and further away from the center. And you've seen this happen asymmetrically too, which has been very interesting, where the Republican Party has moved further away from the center relative to Democrats. And this is something that political scientists can measure. And so if we had, and this is how it's supposed to work in the Constitution, is you have a district that is unified in some way among different characteristics of that community, and then you have somebody represent that community. And so I think it would go a very, very long way to helping the health of our democracy if we had races to the middle again in our politics as opposed to races to the extremes.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. Maybe proportional representation, John. What do you think?
I don't know, man. There's a geography issue with that. And so we might end up actually dissolving the union if we did that. And I'm a little concerned about that.
Maybe.
So
maybe. Yeah, do you think our differences are so vast that if we sat down and had that conversation, it would dissolve our union?
I think that our differences would break down along geographic lines, unlike typically what we think it would in this discussion, which would be ideological lines. And if you have parties break down along geographic lines with the size of our country, the diversity of our country, the history of our country, I think over several election cycles, we would end up seeing secessionist movements if we went to a proportional representation system.
Yeah.
Shablam.
Texas does it every year. It seems.
Yeah,
like.
I mean, I don't think we would have a union in several election cycles if we did it. Although I'm very, very interested in being wrong, because the two-party system is not healthy. I think maybe the only redeeming quality is that it is a unifier in our country, because it forces, Democrats in Georgia to agree with Democrats in Colorado, who agree with Democrats in New York, and that's wouldn't happen
fair.
in a proportional representation system.
It is stabilizing.
That's exactly
stabilizing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So does that outweigh all the negatives? I don't know. I would love to find a better way to do it, but I don't know if there is one.
Well, I wish that. No, it's fine. I think it has the potential to be stabilizing if we can avoid what John was just talking about, which is like this like migration to the extremes, right? Like that is incredibly destabilizing. But I was kind of disappointed that within this voter rights legislation that there wasn't any kind of proposal to move to some sort of ranking system in terms of, choosing your first, second, third choice for a particular position, so that you don't throw your vote to someone that your vote doesn't become a throwaway vote if the person that you're voting for isn't the most popular candidate, right?
I think ranked choice voting is one of the best ways we can improve our democracy. Listeners, for a way to understand that is you would have 3 votes, essentially, a first, a second, and a third place for, let's say, president. And if the first place person didn't win, then your vote would go to
look at it like favorites too, like first, second, third favorite.
Basically,
That's right.
first, second, third favorite. So if your first favorite doesn't win, then your vote falls to the second favorite. So that means that conceivably, if everybody in the country had the same person second, it's very possible that person could win 0 first votes
place
and
votes
still
and actually win. Right.
And actually win.
That could have been
probably
Kanye
would
West
be a really, really great
Could have been Kanye West.
My God,
candidate.
can you imagine if Kanye West had gotten elected? That would have been
No.
So
And
terrible.
also, can I offer you guys a fun historical fact? That is how Lincoln won the 1860 presidential nomination. He was like, hey, man, I understand Seward or Bates or Chase or whoever are your first candidates, but if things don't work out, maybe I'm your second. And he ended up being the greatest president in the United States history by a lot. Debate me on it. Let's go. And so
we don't have time for that right now. We don't have time for that right now.
So the ranked choice voting has a strong history in the United States, and we should really go there. It's a great, simple way. And I think, doesn't Maine do that? Don't they do that? I think there's a state that just implemented
I think there's
that.
a couple states that do rank, actually.
Let's go. Ranked choice voting.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I hate the arguments that are really against it right now, which is that it would slow down the process, right? Because in a lot of states, you have to have a certain amount of votes. And if you had, you have to basically have a majority of whatever's cast. And if you had the rank, you would have a bunch of runoffs that would end up happening. And well, I mean, but then the runoff ends up being between 2 people and it ends up being a first past the post anyway.
Yeah, but at least we went through a layer.
So what I'm getting at is that the hill to die on, it looks like, is going to be voting rights over the next year. That is the new hill.
If democracy is an engine, voting rights is the oil.
100%. It has to get passed. We're at a crux right now, and especially with the thought process on the right and the ethos on the right, which is that this last election was stolen from them, which is what's driving all of this voting thing on the right, which is that you have to stop illegal voting from happening.
Quote unquote.
Right, exactly. It's no surprise that they've reacted this way, but there has to be a stamp down that says, no, as a democracy, we cannot have these types of laws come in because you get sore about losing an election.
And I think the maybe the point to end on here is that this is not some like fanciful dream or utopian dream that we all have. When people feel like they can contribute to their society. They are more productive members of that society. And then in turn, when you have more diversity contributing to your society, you have a stronger society. And so the more voices we can have participating in our government means the better off all of us are going to be, because we're going to have better ideas that happen, that become policy. So this is why we support democracy. It's not a utopian dream. It is a real cold, hard reality of how humanity governs itself right now.
I think it just goes back to, like, again, this whole, and I see this a lot with like the people who are opposed to like the program that I run at the community college, which helps women who are low income come back to school, and we help them out with things like childcare, internet, transportation, all that stuff, so that they can be successful. And there's this idea that, like, if we give something to someone else, whether that is a financial resource or the right to vote, we lose something. Right? Like I have to give something up. And while that might be true sometimes, right? While my vote might count slightly less if I'm thinking about people who also might vote like me, there are more people who are going to vote who are not like me. I think overall what we stand to gain is so much more valuable. I mean, if you're thinking about just enfranchising people, period, when people vote, it's because they have power, it's because they have agency, it's because they have control over their lives. They feel like they're contributing citizens, and they're going to be able to make decisions for themselves as a collective that benefit all of us as a whole. This doesn't have to be a zero-sum game where if somebody wins, somebody else loses. We can all win a little bit if we're willing to compromise.
Yeah, this is a win-win here, people. This isn't a win-lose, lose-win. This is a win-win. WW.
Yeah, exactly. That's why you should support the Voting Rights Act. You should support it because it is a win-win. What Jordan's saying is 100% correct.
Hang out with any Republicans? Like, do you have any Republicans that you have to hang out with on a regular basis?
Yeah, I'm stuck living with one right now. It's terrible.
How is that? Talk about it.
No, I'd
I'm
rather
just
not.
curious. What are your bipartisan relationships like? Do you have any?
Oh man, this is an entirely separate podcast.
Okay.
Well, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for hanging out with us this evening. Jordan Scruggs, thank you for joining us this evening.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Oh man,
Jordan, can we get an amen? Jordan, can we get an amen?
Amen.
Amen.
Yes, Lord.
Godspeed, everybody.
What was Hitler's mother's name?
This
What
took a turn.
does that have to do with a sharp left? A very sharp left.
I was gonna try and call you the little dictator's mom, something clever, but
Oh, that's where we were going with
Nice.
that.
Okay,
Okay,
that's where
I get
you were
it.
going.
No, that makes a lot more sense.
I see where we went. She is a dictator.
it's all good.
The answer is Jordan, by the way.
Gratefully, she hasn't killed 500,000 people yet. So,
Yeah, that's true. She's still
fingers
counting.
crossed.
Yeah, but
She's
much
still
more than
unknown.
that under Hitler's belt. And Blake, yeah, maybe we can leave the Hitler references off for the
Yeah.
next couple podcasts.
I might just edit all that out.
It's getting weird.